Hi, I'm Richie Zellon, and I want to share a true story with you. Some time ago, a friend of mine who's a piano player hired a guitarist he had never played with for a last-minute dinner gig at a country club playing standards in the background. During the first set, the guitarist was familiar with most of the standards called, and he even played some okay solos. It turns out that during the second set, the waiter came up between songs and requested that they play Happy Birthday for one of the dinner guests. Since there was no vocalist, the piano player quickly glanced over at the guitarist, and without giving it a second thought, he hollered, "Happy birthday in C. You play the melody. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. And the guitarist spent the first 4 measures searching all over the fretboard for the right notes until the pianist was forced to take over. Now, I am told this is the same guitarist that just a few minutes earlier had found his way around Autumn Leaves, Satin Doll, and several other standards. How is this possible? Well, stick around because in this video, I'm going to share with you the reason this scenario is a lot more common than you imagine and how to avoid it. Welcome back to the Jazz Guitar channel. And if this is your first time and you want to learn everything you can about jazz guitar, please consider subscribing and be sure to click the notification bell so you won't miss a thing. Back to the jazz guitarist who couldn't play Happy Birthday, even if his life depended on it. And I'm, of course, talking about ear training. And this is the first in a 2-part series of ear training related videos. Today, I want to discuss 2 types of ear training, formal and informal. I also want to talk about perfect versus relative pitch. Finally, I want to share my experience and thoughts regarding players who have a great difficulty with ear training no matter how hard they try. Is there any hope for them? Can they and should they even attempt to play jazz? So to illustrate some of these concepts and answer some of these questions, I'm going to tell you about my personal ear training journey. Like most people who took up the guitar in the past half-century, I was inspired to play by listening to my favorite rockers. I was into Hendrix, Zeppelin, Cream, and of course, the Beatles. The thing is that I was initially self-taught and there were no rock guitar teachers at the time where I grew up. So in a way, this was a blessing in disguise. If I wanted to learn some riffs in order to solo, I had to figure them out by ear entirely by myself. So to make a long story short, after discovering that my guitar heroes learned mainly or were influenced by Black American blues guitarists, I got a hold of a B.B. King record, Live at County Jail. Now, these were the very early 70s, and there were no CDs and no computers, just good old-fashioned analog turntables. And I was fortunate that my turntable had a 16 RPM setting. So I took that 33 RPM B.B. King record and played the solos at 16 RPM, which was half speed. Unfortunately, this brought the pitch down an octave, but it was the best option available. So I would come home from school every day and cop a few riffs here and there from that B.B. King record. In the beginning, it was hard because I had to retain each note in the riff in my head and hunt for it all over the fretboard. But soon I got better from doing it so much, and I was able to learn most of the blues solos. As a result of the work I did transcribing those B.B. King licks, now when I soloed, I heard the individual intervals they were made up of in my head, and I knew where each of these sounds were situated on the fretboard. I didn't necessarily know if it was, say, the third or the fifth of the scale. I just knew how to reproduce them at will. What I have described so far is what I like to refer to as informal ear training. It also happens to be of the relative pitch variety. This means that you can identify an interval in relationship to a given pitch. So in my case, if you played an A, for example, I knew in my head that all the notes in the A minor pentatonic scale, what they sounded like. And I could hear in my head the sound I was going to play before playing it. As a result of this, when I started doing formal ear training, it was just a matter of giving these intervals their numerical name. That is, a third, a fifth, and so on. So what about perfect pitch and formal ear training? Perfect pitch is not something most of us have or even need. It consists of hearing any single fixed pitch and identifying what individual note it is, that is in 4/40 tuning, without relating it to any scale or musical context. So say you play an E flat on a piano. The person with perfect pitch will immediately identify it as such. If the piano is flat, on the other hand, the person will also tell you. So to use an analogy, a person with perfect pitch is kind of like a human tuner of sorts. Now, some people are actually born with perfect pitch. It has its pros and cons sometimes. For example, if a band, everyone has tunes slightly sharp or flat, it can annoy the hell out of the person with perfect pitch. However, I'm sure that the pros outweigh the cons. Perfect pitch can be attained through long and proper training, but you must determine whether it will be worth the time and effort. I say this because to improvise and play jazz in general, relative pitch is much more important, not to mention practical. Enough said on relative and perfect pitch. Let's talk a little about formal ear training. And this brings me back to when I first tried to learn a Wes Montgomery solo by slowing down my turntable, thinking that I would get the same results I got with my B.B. King recording. The difference was that instead of dealing with one pentatonic scale for the entire solo, now I was dealing with various scales and all sorts of chromatic embellishments. And of course, before you can even attempt this, you must understand how to play these scales and progressions on your instrument. And I had no understanding of all those scales and chords. In other words, I didn't yet have a known harmonic context I could relate those notes to in that Wes Montgomery solo. So even if I could play a phrase by Wes, it had no practical use. Now let's go back and relate everything I've shared with you to try and better understand what was going on with a jazz guitarist who could not play Happy Birthday. We know he didn't have perfect pitch because if you have perfect pitch and you can hear Happy Birthday in your head, you are also automatically identifying what notes each pitch in Happy Birthday represents. Did he have informal ear training? Well, I would venture to guess that he had some because he was able to solo through several standards. How is this possible, you might ask? Well, I'm going to tell you this from many years of teaching experience. I have had students who really work hard on their technique. They learn all their scales and arpeggios and have a very good understanding of applying all that theory to the fretboard. In other words, they know where all their intervals are. They also have a decent sense of rhythm, which is very important, and I will talk more about that shortly. However, if you were to stop them and ask them to play Happy Birthday or Mary Had a Little Lamb in a certain key, if they didn't already know it, they would have to fumble around for a few minutes until they could figure it out. Their technique and theoretical knowledge in this case is way ahead of their ear training. And whatever informal ear training they have acquired is the result of the countless hours they've spent learning to improvise by mainly understanding the theory and the fretboard only. So they are picking the notes they play because they know they sound good from theory coupled with experience. They are not necessarily hearing it first in their head. And I know because I was once in this place also. The funny thing is that an audience obviously doesn't know or give a hoot whether or not you hear the music in your head before you play it. All they're concerned with is that it sounds like good music. And these days, I'm not even sure of that. However, there is one musical element that even uneducated audiences will pick up on, and that is rhythm. Bad rhythm and timing is inexcusable. Most people relate to music through dancing, so they are subconsciously trying to identify that downbeat. That is why in this day and age, so much electronic music has that strong, consistent thump, 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 thump on the downbeat. Producers know it is the lowest common denominator all people can latch on to in order to dance. So, you can fool an audience with some bad note choices and great rhythm, but you can't get away with great note choices and bad rhythm. And the jazz guitarist who could not play Happy Birthday, I'm sure had a good sense of rhythm and swing. In spite of this, a discerning jazz audience is going to notice that the player lacks thematic development, is repetitious, and never quite reaches a climax in their solo. In other words, aside from playing the proper scales and maybe a Charlie Parker lick here and there, their hearing limitations limit their ability to develop a solo that tells a story, so to speak. So this brings us to the ultimate question. Can we play jazz without formal ear training? The answer is absolutely yes. But most likely, you will never become a great player and you will never experience the true joy of being in the moment and developing a solo from beginning to end, dictated solely by what you hear in your head. Ideally, ear training and theory should go hand in hand. They complement each other. Now, there are rare exceptions, even in jazz, where the player neglects one or the other. So yes, there are known musicians who have done enough informal ear training without much theory and actually become great improvisers. This is very rare, but there are exceptions. And one such exception that immediately comes to mind is Chet Baker. He played totally by ear. He improvised beautifully over lots of standards, but could not read a note and had no theoretical understanding of jazz harmony. This, of course, had its cons. He usually could only play the standards he knew by memory and had no way of communicating in formal musical terms with other musicians. But then again, he was one of the exceptions to the rule. No great jazz musician would advise taking this route to master the music. To conclude, I want to share my thoughts regarding players who have a great difficulty with ear training, no matter how hard they try. Can they and should they even attempt to play jazz? I have had and have some students who don't have a good ear to begin with. Some of them agree to do ear training and make progress while others have a much more difficult time and end up getting very frustrated to the point of wanting to quit playing. Curiously, on the other hand, they are making good progress on the instrument, and if you hear them play, you wouldn't know that they have these hearing problems. So when they get frustrated, I say, stop with the ear training for now. Keep working on your playing. Pick the ear training back up down the road. And usually, the amount of repertoire and improvisation exercises they do with the passing of time provides sufficient informal ear training so that when they actually get back into a formal mode of melodic ear training, it becomes easier. So if this is your case, this might be something to consider. Either way, neither I or any other musician has the right to tell you to quit playing jazz or music just because you don't have great ears for now. For now. In the next video, I will explain and demonstrate the 3 levels of jazz ear training that I teach. I will also suggest some initial tips and exercises for you to get started. Meanwhile, I'd love to hear your comments regarding this often neglected subject of ear training. Please share with us in the comments section down below any experience you might have had as a result of informal ear training. Remember, your experience may provide valuable insight for others, and I believe this is what we are here for, to help and inspire each other. If you enjoyed this lesson and you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and be sure to click on the bell icon so you won't miss a thing. Have fun and see you in the next video.